And joining us to make sense of it all are Deal and Chabeleng, Transform RSA President, Tsepo Khadima, political analyst. Thanks indeed, gentlemen, for your time. Is there much that Sars can do in terms of the jurisdiction, their mandate, and how far they can reach in terms of investigating this particular leak?
The South African Revenue Service can only do something to the extent that they are empowered in law to do so. So at the moment, pretty much they are limited in terms of what they can do, but there is something that they can do. It is very comforting to hear that they are in fact going to be following up on these leaks. And we wait with great anticipation to see if the guilty will be brought to book, applying the existing laws. But if anything, what we have to be really putting pressure on as civil society, as ordinary citizenry, and particularly on our lawmakers, is to ensure that there is an urgent overhaul, particularly on our tax laws. We have to bear in mind that for years and years, the reason why these tax havens jurisdictions exist is because they are nothing but tools or schemes for the very rich to avoid doing that which is actually dutiful for them to do, to pay taxes fair and square. And certainly, unless we overhaul our tax laws, our tax code, we will see the continuing hemorrhaging of these trillions of rands that will be leaving our shores and therefore leaving our economy even more poorer. Now, it has been reported, by the way, and I think there's one economist who will be releasing a report by the end of this week, which demonstrates that over 600 billion euros a year is actually siphoned into these tax havens by the very rich. And that is over 10 trillion rand. In the case of South Africa, we know, as a matter of course, that figure is anywhere between 130 and 160 billion rand every year that is stolen from our shores. What are we going to do about it? Something urgent has to be done. Now, I think what is outstanding for some of us is that the people that have been mentioned in these Paradise Papers and Paradise Leaks have, up till now, really gave the standard PR line that, well, we have not done anything wrong. But here in this case, not just legality, is the ethics and the morals around it. But even more interesting is that our deputy president, who is a presidential candidate for the ANC, in fact, he has been linked to companies that have been linked or have been named not only in Paradise Papers, but in the Panama Papers as well, the name, and even in the Rent Commission of 2002, again, the companies that he has been linked to have been accused of either conduct that is seeked to or had the result of undermining and manipulating our currency exchange, as well as, of course, setting up in tax havens. And as I say, any company that is set up in any tax haven, that company does not have a legitimate business other than to use that tax haven status to defraud the country where the money is earned. And as a result, it means that we as a nation have been defrauded, and the deputy president cannot afford to keep quiet. More so, as he has made it his campaign motto to speak about anything that he regarded to be state capture and otherwise. In this case, there's no worse form of state capture than the actual companies that are defrauding the ordinary citizens through taxes.
Yeah, you're saying that there's a different application or interpretation of corruption, be it white-collar crime or be it, in this case, the state of capture allegations. But if we don't have the mechanism, that this is not new information, so to speak, in terms of what Africa had to shed to empower other nations. If there are no mechanisms and we still have to wait for policy reform, it could be another generation to come before we see change.
No, actually, by the way, good evening to all the viewers. Cindy, South Africa has regulation. There are laws that actually prevent anyone stashing away money in tax havens. If you recall, there was a point where South Africa's resources and assets and people who held money in various destinations and actually constituencies, jurisprudences across the world were required that they will be given amnesty. If you recall very well, there was a time when Pravin Gordhan was still a commissioner of Sars. They gave away a broad amnesty to say, bring in the money, declare whatever you have outside South Africa. And as a result, through that declaration, we will then give you a pardon. And through that amnesty period, you will not be actually taxed and there will not be punitive measures taken against you. That period and phase actually completely lapsed. And once it lapsed, people who brought and declared what they had in South Africa were then given amnesty. Past that point, we have a situation where there are companies that went and did exactly what the country had laws against. And something of this nature is regarded as illegal, whereby you can take money and stash it away. And by the way, remember the Panama Papers came out. And prominent names came out of that Panama Papers. And those individuals were crucified. I mean, at some point, it was Kulubusi Zuma, who was crucified for having been mentioned in just one of the passing references in the Panama Papers. Today, we have the, what you call the Paradise Papers, which has come out, that clearly speaks about companies like Standard Bank in South Africa, companies like Ilovo in South Africa, who are sugar makers, companies like Shanduka. You have companies that are currently linked to this particular leak that speaks about South African companies stashing away money, and including companies such as headed by Ivor Glosenberg, who's actually one of the biggest Glencore owner as well as a money magnet. This kind of practices, if allowed to happen and go further, will completely derail South Africa of its economic trajectory. When we say radical economic transformation, it is the same capital that these guys are earning in South Africa, and they are taking away or not even repatriating it back into the South African economy and paying taxes on behalf of that and reinvesting that money in South Africa. Instead, they have that money stashed away in the safe havens, whereby it does not even grow those destinations.
Yeah,
it
I
is
just want us to
bent
peel
away.
the layers and maybe just for clarity in how all of this comes about. Many of these companies are linked to Appleby International law firm.
The legal firm, yes.
Legal firm, and then they've got interests in multiple countries. Let's take a case of Zambia, for example, how the corporate tax laws were reduced for a Standard Bank in their loan to Glencore to procure a mine there to 0.5% of what they're supposed to have paid of the 35%.
Yeah.
So there must be some government or official that enables this particular exercise to perpetuate.
Yeah, we must say that I think the governments are, of course, implicit in this tax fraud. Interesting that in this Paradise Leaks, even the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, by the way, is found to have had money in one of these tax havens. So you have to really ask and say, well, then what hope do we have that even if the Queen herself is not able to be honest with her taxes, what chance do we have against the others? But anyway, that's beside the point. What we find is this: the very rich, they not only bulldoze their way, they threaten, they do everything imaginable against governments, particularly governments that they regard as weak. And they buy the politicians to make sure that the politicians never pass the laws that will ensure that fairer taxes are paid. And that is a problem that we sit with. So if anything, as South Africans, Zambia, see that example, or DRC, any of those, we're not going to worry about them. I'm more worried about South Africa. We have to now start to put a fine microscope on the whole of Treasury, starting with the minister, starting with everybody below, and starting with the Finance Committee in Parliament, the Standing Committee on Finances in Parliament, because that is a value chain of the tax laws in terms of what is constraining them, what is impeding them from ensuring that our tax code and our tax laws are such that it will be of no effect if any corporate that is earning income from this country, if they set up in some tax haven jurisdiction, it should be of no effect to our economy, to our fiscus in terms of tax collection. And that is because for as long as we have not stamped out transfer pricing, which is referred to as illicit financial flows, as long as we have not amended our tax laws to ensure that we start taxing production, and I always give this example. We have Citi, the global investment banking giant, around 2010, 2011, came out with a report saying South Africa's mineral wealth is worth $2.5 trillion US dollars.
Excuse me.
And with that report confirming that South Africa's mineral wealth is worth $2.5 trillion, what we have done as a country is actually we have outsourced and given that $2.5 trillion wealth into the hands of the mining companies, who are in turn establishing in these tax havens and therefore not even paying the bare minimum tax in this country. And that is the conduct that has to stop. But unless we put pressure and microscope focus on the politicians, on the lawmakers, we have no chance, because they are being put under tremendous pressure. And I'm saying, even to some extent, they might be induced in any other manner never to amend the tax code to remedy this malady.
If there may be any change, and I'm going to speak to Edward Nottoli, spokesperson for the MK Inkululeko Foundation, who joins us via Skype. You penned a paper to Sars Commissioner Tom Moyane asking for an investigation of the Panama Papers, and more specifically the South African subsidies that were mentioned, Standard Bank, Investec, Shanduka and Glencore. But, you know, we were speaking about the capacity of just one financial agency or entity, as opposed to looking at the entire value chain. Mr. Nottoli, what are you hoping will come out of this letter? Hi, Edward.
Good evening, our viewers. Thank you so much. Basically, we are looking at this scandal again as an onslaught on the African people. Remember that only a few months ago, South African companies, white monopoly capital, was referred to the Competition Commission for violating several laws of South Africa by colluding in terms of defrauding the South African government in taxes, by colluding in terms of price fixing. All these allegations are still being investigated by the Competition Commission. Before we get to a conclusion on that matter, we are faced with a more serious kind of violation in terms of our tax laws. Remember that 2 years ago, a former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, who chaired the AU panel, said that over the past 5 years, 5 decades, it was believed that Africa had lost more than 1 trillion in illicit financial outflows. He said the continent lost about $50 billion every year through these illicit flows. Tax havens and financial secrecy jurisdictions in Africa and
Mr. Nottoli, yeah.
Problem.
No, okay, no, we understand that. I mean, we've got the papers in front of us. Yes, I'm saying that besides the letter and, you know, the horror and gasp that we now expressing with regards to the illicit flows and how it impacts on inequality and poverty on the continent, but specifically also in South Africa, what more is there for government to do?
Look, government has the rules. Government has the laws. Government has the regulation. Tax avoidance as well as tax evasion, by the way, tax evasion is a criminal penalty that is punishable according to criminal acts, as well as companies, as well as company directors can be prosecuted and should be prosecuted with regards to this matter. If, for instance, Standard Bank, Shanduka, and all of the other named mentioned companies, you know, Glencore, as well as Ilovo, and including MTN and all of them, who have actually been practicing tax evasion by making sure that they declare the amount of income that they are holding in their companies. And as a result, they use schemes such as using tax havens as well as using, taking money overseas and abroad and hiding it away in destinations that are not declared in South Africa. That is a clear legal issue, that is a criminal issue, and that must be punishable. The tax avoidance of it is these monies were not actually declared in South Africa, and they were not even using the Sars tax regime in order to reduce their tax burden. So this amount of money is not been paid in South Africa. Again, South Africa only received 285 billion rands out of the tax collection that is made on an annual basis from companies, from corporations that are all making money in South Africa. 285. The other 285 comes out of UIF. The other 200, the 400 comes out of pay as you earn. Right? So if we are, as the citizens, are paying so much money towards subsidizing these companies in order to come and take money and profits into South Africa and hide them through tax evasion schemes and mechanisms, and companies like KPMG, by the way, were companies that were some of the advisors to some of these companies that have been avoiding in South Africa. So we have to come very clear to SARS, and SARS must give us now the way forward with regards to what parliamentarians are going to do.
Is there an appetite, though? Is there an appetite?
Is illegal.
I mean, the attitude from Appleby saying that they've seen the questions of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and they're satisfied that there is no evidence of wrongdoing, implying that the laws applicable to them are different from ordinary folk like you and I. So how then do you work around that if indeed there are laws that protect the rich and allow them to impoverish those beneath the breadline?
Yeah, we have to bear in mind that, by the way, all of this was done in secret. Had it not been for the hackers that had access to that information, most certainly this Appleby would not have voluntarily disclosed. And if anything, everybody else who sets up in a tax haven, they do so for conditions of anonymity and for conditions of secrecy. And that tells you everything there is to it. It's immoral, it's unethical, and effectively it cannot be legal under any circumstances because it is unjust. And injustice can never be law. If it is law, it must be resisted. So what can we do? What I am horrified by the way, is the assertions that came from David Lewis of Corruption Watch, who said that there is nothing illegal about tax avoidance, and with these entities having been set up in tax haven jurisdictions. I mean, that is a horror story to come from somebody who's the head of Corruption Watch. But also even with Business Leadership South Africa, the top 100 companies, I have not heard Mr. Bonam Mohali, who is the CEO or even the chairman of Business Leadership South Africa, actually coming out and condemning in the strongest terms this conduct of companies and the practice of companies setting up in tax jurisdictions, impoverishing even poorer nations and robbing the very people who at the end of the day are living on the breadline, because that is what is done. Here we've got colossal looting by big companies, by big corporates. Why and how can it be that Business Leadership South Africa continues to be quiet? How can it be that they have not, actually to the extent that they signed, the 81 CEOs who are mainly members of Business Leadership South Africa, who signed a petition that President Zuma must step down? How come now they have not signed a declaration of commitment that they will henceforth stop this practice of establishing in tax jurisdictions, because they should be seeing the evil that is in it of robbing the country, and in this case South Africa continues to be poorer because of their conduct. Therefore they have no moral authority, no integrity tomorrow to be shouting anything to anyone about this government and why this government is ineffective under President Zuma, because they are in fact the very chief source of the financial, economic, and all social problems that we have by this conduct. But more so, Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa owes it to this nation to now, because the information that has been out there, if he is hoping that he will be elected president of the ANC and eventually president of the country, his attitude towards this practice, which has been found to not have been an acceptable form of practice by companies, what is his attitude towards it? He owes it to this nation to explain that, more so because the information that has been there has not been disputed. Now, if he's disputing, by all means, he should also come out and say he has not been involved, or those companies, it is falsehood, what has been leaked.
And I mean, we bear the brunt, of course, of this profit shifting and erosion of the ability of the Reserve Bank or the revenue services to collect tax and improve the lives of the locals. Edward Nottoli is a spokesperson of the MK Inkululeko Foundation. He joins us on via Skype. You were just explaining what the terms of engagement and reference are, Mr. Nottoli. If you can just give us a sense, where is this petition going? What are your objectives and what do you hope to get out of it? Hi, Edward. All right, can you hear it? Can you hear us now? Mr. Nottoli?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I was
hear
saying,
you.
yeah, no, just explain the process. You've now submitted the letter. What's next?
Yes, I was saying that we want Sars. We want Sars to have the power to indict white men or black men, any company that is implicated in the tax evasion and illicit financial flows. We find that today, South Africa is used as the capital or conduit for the looting that is happening in Africa. So white monopoly capital has decided to use South Africa as the conduit for offshoring the ill-gotten wealth that is supposed to benefit the black people of Africa. We condemn this practice, and it is time that it comes to an end. It has been going on for a long time. We know it has been going on for a long time. But time has come now for these white criminals to be exposed. We at MK Nkululeko Foundation say it is now time that the South African Revenue Services investigate and comes to the bottom of all these kind of criminal activities that have been taking on, perpetrated by white monopoly capital.
Edward, we're gonna have to let you go. The line is also not so fantastic. We do apologize to our viewers for that poor quality in audio. Just the closing remarks in, are you going to collaborate? Are you looking at, you know, bolstering at least what the Nkululeko Foundation is trying to do? How do we hold the government and even these organizations accountable that have been mentioned?
We support the MK Foundation, Nkululeko Foundation, in their attempt to bring this matter to actually a foreclosure. But what we actually want to even emphasize is that government must take steps to actually implement what is asset forfeiture. If South African sovereignty government understands that there's money sitting somewhere which was illegally taken out of the country, which was not even declared in the South African books, they have the rights to actually collaborate with Interpol and engage Interpol as well as those sovereign jurisdictions and go and demand that that money is actually South African money, even if it belongs in those companies, that it must be repatriated into South Africa. Thereafter, after it has been taxed, it then can actually be now given to the companies. But at this case, we know right now that there is a criminal action that has already happened, where the fact that there is already accounts which are overseas that have not been declared in terms of South Africa's declaration of income.
Vested interests, as we know, with
the vested interests are simple.
Who've got shares or whom themselves might be victims if this particular
Cindy, this matter is today. If we knew that today it was President Zuma who had these accounts overseas in the tax havens, he would have been completely thrown under the bus. He would have been the topic discussion, because it is not Zuma, it is related to the deputy president, who in his own capacity must now be taken to account and must actually respond to this matter. So there has to be fairness in the way we account and we actually hold each other to accountability.
All right, we're out of time, but thanks indeed, Adil and Chabeleng, Transform RSA President, and Sepo Khadima, political analyst. And we had on the line Mr. Edward Nottoli, spokesperson of the MK Nkululeko Foundation, joining us via Skype. We'll take a quick break. We'll see you shortly.